Hello, welcome to our channel. How are you? May you always be healthy and more enthusiastic. Min. Summary of the storyline of the film this time, entitled Rumble. Jimbo Coyle Stadium, in the city of Stoker, will be held a World Monster Wrestling match, to fight for the Big Belt title. Winnie Coyle came to support Tentacular, Stoker's mainstay wrestler. Winnie is the daughter of Jimbo Coyle, coach of the legendary wrestler Rayburn, who has won the Big Belt 9 times. But Jimbo and Rayburn reportedly disappeared at sea. The residents of Stoker enthusiastically support Tentacular, which is trained by Siggy, who was Jimbo's assistant. When the match started, Tentacular was overwhelmed, facing various kinds of wrestling technique attacks from his opponent's King Gorge. Tentacular eventually wins the match, after being told by Winnie the weakness of the King Gorge technique. Stoker residents who support Tentacular, shocked by Tentacular's statement, left Stoker and moved to Slitherpool, which was promoted by Jimothy. Plus, a notification from the mayor, that the stadium will be demolished, and made into a parking lot by Jimothy, in 90 days. Winnie, who doesn't want to lose the stadium, heads to Pittsmore, to find new wrestlers, coached by Winnie to defend the stadium. Winnie is belittled, and laughed at by the wrestlers. Winnie meets Steve, who Winnie remembers being the son of Rayburn, the legendary wrestler. Steve is forced to accept an offer to be coached by Winnie, after being fined by Lady Mayhen, the owner of a wrestling match in Pittsmore, for breaking a promise to always lose. Steve, at training with Winnie, very weak in physical training. Winnie's mother gave a message: train the monsters you have, not the monsters you want. Winnie learns from Steve, that Steve really likes dancing. Winnie, who remembers her mother's message, trains Steve with dance moves. In the first match, Steve managed to win the match, albeit in an embarrassing way in the struggle, by running until his opponent was exhausted. In the second and subsequent matches, Steve began to show his ability to win the match, by beating opponents using his dancing technique. Winnie goes to the mayor, proudly announces their multiple victories, and is invited to a match, by King Gorge at Stoker Stadium. Winnie asks the mayor to cancel the agreement with Jimothy, destroying the stadium into a parking lot. But instead, Jimothy and Tentacular informed him that they would speed up the schedule for the demolition of the stadium, plus the truth, that King Gorge could no longer compete in wrestling. Winnie was desperate, and sent Steve back to Pittsmore. Winnie and Steve are excited to defend the stadium again, after Steve tells Winnie that the experience with Winnie made him meaningful, even though he didn't win the Big Belt later. Winnie and Steve challenge the Tentacular to a match at the Stoker Stadium, to cancel blowing up the stadium, if Steve is able to survive for 3 rounds. Tentacular is excited to accept the challenge, after learning Steve is Rayburn Jr., Rayburn's son. Rayburn Jr. underwent training, in preparation for the Tentacular, and managed to do well in training. By the time game day arrived, Rayburn Jr. was nervous and scared, when was about to compete. Winnie strengthened and motivated Rayburn Jr., that you don't have to be someone else to compete, but be yourself to compete. In the first round, Rayburn Jr. managed to get through with her dance dodging the Tentacular's attacks. Rayburn Jr. also made it through the second round, despite experiencing many difficulties and being cornered by Tentacular. When going to the third round, Winnie had wanted to decide to give up, after being influenced by Siggy, but finally decided to continue the match, because of Rayburn Jr.'s strategic spirit. This time, Rayburn Jr. not only dodge, but also counterattack the Tentacular. Rayburn Jr. managed to win the match, by defeating the Tentacular following Winnie's directions, and performing his signature move, Moon Boom. The victory of Rayburn Jr. was welcomed by Stoker supporters. That's a summary of the storyline of the film this time. Please support our channel by clicking subscribe. Thank you, see you again.